Right, hello there, boys and girls, ladies and gents, and welcome to another fine instalment of News and Politics. Until I think of a better title for this video, it's me, Captain Swiss, and I'm joined here by Tom. I'm not doing video today because, as you know, by looking outside or just feeling the temperature of the air on your skin, it's hot today. It's very hot, and I've got an appropriate amount of clothing on in order to keep nice and cool. So you'll just have to listen to my lovely voice for today. The main thing that I wanted to come and talk to you guys about was the Labour rebellion over welfare changes, or that there was going to be a rebellion, and it appeared to be quite high numbers. And now there are apparently some concessions in the works, and now maybe there's less people rebelling. So we need to look into that a little bit further. But before all of that, I shall say hello to Tom. How are you doing?
I'm okay. There's no issues with me.
Jolly, and we're both sitting here with fans on right now as well, aren't we? That was something we established before we went live.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um, all right then. What I was thinking of doing is bringing up a little article here. Oh, hang on. No, no. Right, I could hear myself in my own ears there. That was me opening our stream tab in the other one. I was thinking I'll bring up a little article just to bring us up to speed with what's happening with it at the moment, and then we can sort of backtrack a little bit over the course of the past week. Because I imagine that Bullet's been following this one fairly closely, as it's been ongoing. Welfare concessions to be set out before key vote. The government is to release more details about the concessions it has made over proposed welfare changes as ministers attempt to quell a rebellion of Labour MPs. Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall said the government is aiming to deliver a fairer, more compassionate benefit system ahead of a vote on its reforms on Tuesday, which is tomorrow. Last week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was forced into a U-turn to salvage his benefits changes after more than 120 Labour MPs threatened to vote down the plans. Now, if I'm correct, I think that number of Labour MPs voting against it, plus, in theory, all of the other opposition MPs lining up against it, that would have ended up being a loss for the government on that bill, right? That's the way that it was appearing at the time if they'd gone ahead and everyone had rebelled. So I'm assuming that's why they're now offering some concessions.
Yeah, because basically what would have happened is if the 130 MPs had voted against it, then what would have the end result of that would have been that the government would have been defeated by about a very large number because only 280 Labour MPs would have voted for the reforms. And so that would have meant that the only way that they would have ever gotten them passed is to basically have the Tories vote in favour of the reforms along with the 280 Labour MPs. And needless to say, the Labour Party getting a bill cutting welfare through Parliament with Tory votes wasn't going to ever go down well. So it was never really an option for them. So concessions, so they either had the choice of either doing concessions or they had to completely drop the bill as a whole because the whips were not convincing any MP to vote in favour of the reforms, no matter what they said or what they did. And apparently, this is a rebellion that had been brewing for the last few months anyway. The whips had told the government this, but the government ignored the whips and pressed on ahead regardless until this critical moment, critical mass was reached, and it ended in a massive rebellion that would have been more than large enough to defeat even the huge majority that the government has in Parliament already.
And I don't know where. Thank you very much for that, Tom. I don't know where to begin with this almost because there's so many things to pick up on. The first of which being, it's quite remarkable that you had a pretty fresh government, only been in for about a year, facing such a large rebellion on a bit of legislation already. They've obviously already done a U-turn on the winter fuel payments, which was sort of like their first very unpopular policy that they'd marched the Labour MPs in to vote for, and then obviously this one with the welfare changes. I mean, I remember was it a couple of months ago now when we were covering this on a stream. I don't know if you were with me for it, if I was with someone else, but I remember when they were announcing it, thinking there's too much of this that's just hurting people. You know, I can absolutely understand the motivation of saying, trying to get more people into work, trying to help them access work, trying to make sure the right people are on the right benefits and yada, yada, yada. But then you also had like straight up cuts to certain things that people were getting anyway. And that feels so opposite to what you expect the political instinct of a Labour government to be. And I assume that as far as the MPs are concerned, you know, they've gone and spoken to their constituents. They're getting lots of complaints about it. They've, like you said, they've been unhappy about it for a long time. And then finally, it comes to the point where the vote on the changes is just around the corner. And that amazingly fine-tuned political antennae that Keir Starmer has, which I'm sure he bought secondhand from Rishi Sunak, has finally clicked into gear and told them, no, there's just no way that you're going to be able to survive this vote. Let me read a little bit more of this article very quickly. So last week, the Prime Minister was forced... Oh, go on.
I was going to say the core problem with it is that it was fundamentally not what you would expect from a Labour Party to do or from a Labour government. And that was the reason why it generated so much controversy when it was all being done. It was just seen as un-Labour, basically. By the end of it, the rebellion had grown so large that the only people in the Labour side who were still voting in favour of this was basically the payroll vote, which is about 200 MPs who are all on the government payroll because they're either junior ministers, PPSs, ministers, etc., and the real hard right of the Labour Party. Basically, those were the only people who were to the right of Blairites. Basically, those are the only people who are left voting for it. Everybody else, the whole of the left wing, the whole of the soft left, and even most of the Blairites were voting against this because it was just seen as an un-Labour thing to do.
Can I pick up on? Can I pick up on this for just a moment then? Because in previous votes, often I guess you could call it the so-called usual suspects that will tend to be the most likely to rebel on things. It's usually sort of the left of the party, those that are in or around sort of like the socialist campaign group, the sorts that you know, would be good friends with Jeremy Corbyn if he was still in the party. But this is absolutely not confined to the left of Labour. It's the left, it's the soft left, it's the mushy centre. Like you say, it's basically all the backbenchers, apart from those who are ideologically very committed to cutting benefits. But apart from that, you've pretty much had the whole party rise up in rebellion. And obviously that reflects, I strongly imagine, what the party members feel, what the Labour Party voters feel. It's just been a very unpopular proposal through and through, really.
Yeah, pretty much, and that was the core issue with it. And there was another element to this as well, but I'll wait and see if the article that we're reading picks up on it before I bring it up.
Okay, no problem. I was just getting a little bit of echo from you there, but you've muted yourself anyway. We'll see how you are when you come back. Right, so where was I?
I always mute myself when I'm not speaking, so I'm still here.
All right, yeah, no problem. No, I didn't mean going. Just when you're back talking. On Monday, the government published new modelling suggesting that around 150,000 people will be pushed into poverty by 2030 as a result of the welfare cuts. This is lower than the 250,000 figure before the government scaled back its proposals. A Downing Street spokesman said that the modelling doesn't reflect the full picture and was subject to uncertainty. Asked if there could be further concessions, he said, as you'd expect, the government is continuing to engage closely with parliamentary colleagues about the bill. Now, I think on this modelling, if I'm correct, what I've heard some of them saying previously has been, this modelling doesn't take into account the increased amount of people who might be able to find work as a result of the other measures that we're putting in place amidst these various benefit changes. So that's me just, airing the side from the government for a moment for a little sense.
Yeah, that's what they said before. Yeah.
But my key but is, whether your modelling is saying that 250,000 people might be pushed into poverty or 150,000 people might be pushed into poverty, the point is your own modelling is telling you, guess what, Labour Party, these benefit changes and cuts that you're making are going to harm the well-being of some of the worst off people in society, which is the exact opposite of what Labour voters tend to vote Labour to hope that Labour will do. So this again feeds into our, it's hardly a hot take, is it? Just kind of saying, oh, look, Labour's done something totally opposite to what their own base want them to do.
The other thing about this as well is, and what the government conveniently ignore here, is that modelling predictions can go one of three ways. They can either be correct, they can either be wrong, but in a positive direction, so the modelling was not as bad as it was said to be, or it can be wrong in a negative direction, where the modelling underestimates the harm that is done, and it's actually worse than what modelling shows. So they can say, oh, but the modelling doesn't take into account all these different measures. Yeah, sure, but at the same time, the modelling can also be more generous to you, and there may be even more people put into poverty as a result of these measures. And the actual measures themselves that they give as an excuse for them, they're complete pittance to what you need in order to actually get people into work. Like, I was reading about Tony Blair's attempt back in the early 2000s at welfare reform, and he did the whole welfare from welfare to work policy. That policy was tens of billions of pounds of money in order for it to be a success. And this is only £300 million. It's nothing compared to what Blair did back in the day. And the modelling that I've seen is that the amount of money is so low that the maximum number of people that would get back into work as a result of this, if everything went right, is only 100,000 people. So
I
it's just
will
nothing.
I will add a point though, and this isn't at all to disagree with your analysis of sort of the impact of this and the money being spent versus under the Blair years, but of course one big difference between the Labour government of today and the Blair years is that this Labour government has a lot less money to play with than Blair did back then. So they're sort of doing everything on a little bit of a shoestring budget. Well, most things, like they can find a bit of money for a few things, but not everything. But yeah, you're quite right. I'll read a little bit more of this article here. So the Conservatives say, oh yeah, this is the thing I just thought to myself as well. Could you imagine if Labour was still in opposition and the Tories had done this? The Labour, Starmer a bit at the dispatch box at PMQs going, the government's own analysis says that it will be pushing nearly 200,000 people into poverty. Does Rishi Sunak think this is acceptable? It's amazing how the things change when you get into government, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
A few comments quickly as well. Frank says Switzerland eats rats. Thanks for that, Frank. Rahi says nationalise Greggs. John Cooper says, hey, Swiss can't join us. I'm at work, but listening in. Also adds they can find money for defence. Okay. An amendment that would have halted the bill at its first hurdle was signed by 126 Labour backbenchers. That's a very, very significant amount. Who argue the plans were rushed and would push vulnerable disabled people into poverty. When it became clear that the bill would fall, the Prime Minister offered major concessions to rebel MPs, including limiting personal independence payments, cuts to only new claimants. The government also reversed its plans to freeze the health-related component of universal credit, and the payment will now rise in line with inflation for existing recipients. Ministers will outline the terms of a review for the PIP assessments to be led by the Disabilities Minister, Sir Stephen Timms, in collaboration with disabled people. The regulations that would bring into effect the right for people receiving health and disability benefits to try work without fear of reassessment will also be laid in Parliament. But dozens of MPs still have misgivings about the benefits changes and could defy the government in Tuesday's vote. I'm not sure if it has a number here in the article. It doesn't appear that it does. But I read somewhere in the past day or so that perhaps there are still as many as 50 rebels.
It's
That may
about
end up voting
50,
again.
60 from
50,
what I've
60.
seen.
Okay, then. Okay. So, given all of that, then, that they've put some concessions on the table, and it appears that they've won a bulk of the rebels' background, or at least maybe just over half of them. Does it now appear that the vote will be going ahead tomorrow and it will likely pass? Is that our expectation?
That is expectations, but it's the case now where it's a rather Pyrrhic victory for Starmer, where he passes the legislation, but one significantly closer than it should be, given the size of the majority. Because if it's about 50, 60 MPs voting against it, then that means that the government is only going to have 360 odd MPs vote in favour of it, which keep in mind that this is a government that has a majority of about 410 odd, something like that anyway, 400, 410. So having it be that close for a government with this big of a majority is rather humiliating for Starmer. And as the article didn't mention it, the second point I want to bring it on to, and I think this is actually more interesting than the welfare reforms itself, is the damage that this has done to Starmer's authority and Starmer's credibility, because Starmer just a year ago was elected with the biggest majority ever seen since 1997 for a government, and 1 year later, he has been defeated, essentially defeated by his own backbenchers, because he went from spending all of last week taking a hardline approach, drawing a line in the sand and saying, nope, no concessions, no changes. We are going ahead with this. We are pushing it through, and we do not care what colleagues say. We have to do this, and we will do it. He's gone from that to within 3 days going, okay, we're going to have to make concessions, and has made a huge amount of concessions, which have halved the amount of money that would be saved on the reforms themselves. And the other problem that he has is that it may not even be the end of the saga, even if he does pass the vote tomorrow, because what this has created has essentially created a two-tier system for welfare, because you have people who are already existing claimants who are subjected to a completely different assessment criteria and criteria in general compared to new claimants who have the new one coming in. So the concern that Starmer may have is that this may be subject to a legal challenge in the future under the Equality Act, because it may be the case that it's you're not supposed to have this kind of a two-tier system in place, which means that if it was sent to court and the court case was lost by the government, the entire plan is completely derailed.
And this
So
is when you talk about a two-tier system. So this is what they've been discussing about new people coming onto the benefits receiving less than the people already on the benefits are getting, and that being the disparity between the two. Then
yeah, that's what I mean by the two-tier system. It's the disparity between the two groups of people. The existing claimants who have got one set of criteria that they are subject to, and the new claimants who have a completely different criteria that they're subjected to. And that's where the whole two-tier thing comes through. That's not my words, by the way. That's what the critics of this proposal have said. And I think it was actually said in the article. The phrase two-tier system was mentioned by one of the MPs who is still voting against it.
well, I'll read this comment we've got in the chat here because I was going to jump onto this particular bit. Liebel says, sounds a bit two-tier. If only that rhymed with something. Of course, Keir Starmer has been called two-tier Keir. For I feel a few reasons now as well. Like obviously there was the riots that happened over the summer, with like your anti-immigration or hard right or far right jumble of people labeling him as two-tier Keir because of how they felt about the way that it had been policed. Then you had sort of like the freebies scandal, which created a little bit more of a sense of us and them, between us and the government.
To
And then
be
you've
fair,
got
back
this as well.
then he
Yeah.
wasn't called two-tier Keir. He had two amusing nicknames that were given to him back then. One of them was Free Gear Keir, and the other one was Kashmir Keir. That's another one that he was called back then.
I feel that two-tier Keir is reinforcing itself as time goes on, though, because it seems that there are more and more different examples people are wanting to attach that particular phrase to. But for one of his own MPs to call it two-tier, that's a bit cheeky. They know what people call him.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I very much agree. This is not good for Keir Starmer. He's not in the place that he wants to be. A year into the Premiership, Labour's poll ratings have plummeted, and I think an amount of it has been self-inflicted. I do think that. I think that they've made too many missteps, too many unpopular policies where either they were bad policies in the first place or they've not been able to properly communicate why those policies are necessary, and maybe put it in terms of this thing goes down but then spending on this thing goes up, or what have you.
The
It just
main
seems that
the
they haven't got that knack for communicating with the public, have they?
No, it's also the other problem is as well is that the past year in government has basically been the embodiment of Murphy's Law for Starmer, because everything that could have gone wrong has pretty much gone wrong. You had the whole situation that happened back in the summer last year. And then you had that Rose Garden speech, which was all doom and gloom and made people really unhappy. The budget took far longer than people thought it should have to actually be declared. And then the budget's own figures have been not met because Rachel Reeves' headroom basically keeps being breached and not being met and just rapidly depreciates over time. Trump got elected,
Oh,
which
Tom, I'm just losing you with the mic a little bit. Can you move a bit
all right.
closer?
Is that better now?
That is better.
Yeah, Trump got elected, and the Labour Party was hoping that it would be Harris that would win, and they based a huge amount of their budget on that. And then you had the numerous international crises that have happened all across the world, the tariffs from Trump, the situation with Iran and Israel. You've had. And then you had the local elections, which were a complete disaster for Labour, far worse than
Oh, I
any
need you back again.
far worse than anybody thought they were, and were going to be, even the harshest of critics, because they didn't even get 100 councillors in that one, and that was off of a previous performance that was incredibly bad. Then you had the Island of Strangers comment that generated a lot of controversy, both inside and outside of Labour, and now you've had this welfare thing, and then you've also had the issue with staff as well, the inner circle, people like Sue Gray and Morgan McSweeney that have had a lot of controversy surrounding them. So you've just had basically every single thing that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, and Labour has gone from winning a massive majority a year ago to now being behind Reform on average 10 to 8% in the polls. It's really gone incredibly badly as a first year in government. And some people, including I think John Curtis, have said that this is the worst start to a government in modern history, recent history. If you look at the way polls are in terms of government approval, prime minister approval, and general opinion polling for the next election, as well as electoral performance, it's gone so much worse than even the most harshest of critics of Starmer thought it would go.
There's a lot to unpack there. I will say quickly on the it's gone worse for this is the worst start for a government in recent history. I suppose that is correct, but what I would say is it may be the worst start for a government in recent history, but it's not the worst start for a premiership in recent history. We
Well,
can't
yeah,
forget, of course,
people
dear old
people
Liz
don't,
Truss.
yeah, people don't count the obvious example of Liz Truss because her government was just unprecedentedly bad. Like, she was so bad that no one will ever be able to beat her ever again. Like, she is in a league of her own in terms of how bad she was as a prime minister, which is why whenever these sort of things are said, everybody adds the caveat of except Liz Truss because of just how bad she actually was.
Yes, I'm ever so slightly pedantic against hyperbole when people forget to mention Liz Truss when they're saying this is the worst thing that's ever happened. I go 2022. Come on now, it wasn't that long ago. No, it's you're right. It's been terrible for them, and throughout this first year, Labour have obviously been making efforts to try and chase down Reform voters. That very much seems to be the strategy that who's Starmer's director of comms, John McSweeney. McSweeney?
Morgan McSweeney.
Morgan McSweeney, that's the one. Morgan, who's John McSweeney? Is there a John Sweeney that I'm trying to? No,
There's
did I
a
just
John
conjure him up?
Swinney, who is the SNP leader and the
That's it.
what's
Yeah, okay. John Swinney, the SNP leader. Morgan McSweeney, Labour comms. Gotcha. Yeah, obviously they've been going quite hard to try and recapture reform votes, from my understanding of where they've been positioning themselves, which obviously hasn't really been bearing them much fruit. I guess you could make the argument maybe if they hadn't been doing what they're doing, they would have lost even more support to reform than they have already, but there's not a very good way to test that in the real world. But there is also the element out there that they're bleeding support out from their left. They're sort of, your economic left wing types, your progressive types, your people who've made up a fair chunk of Labour once upon a time. They've been drifting away over the past, well, but for longer than the past year, pretty much ever since Corbyn went. But it's probably intensified in the past 12 months.
Yeah, this is the weird thing about Labour's strategy at the moment is there is this hyperfixation on reform, and to be fair, I do understand why that is because the Labour government
Oh,
is likely
closer
the
again, please. Thank you.
casting back memories to the 2019 general election where the Labour Party was obliterated because its former heartland seats went to the Tories, and so they're worried that if they don't appeal to reform come 2029, the same thing is going to happen again, but reform is going to sweep the heartlands instead of the Tories. But the other problem with this is that Labour is hyper focusing on reform to the detriment of their newer base, the people in cities and urban areas and the university towns who are sort of the more urban progressive types, who have been more and more unhappy with Labour's shift towards the centre, and in some cases, such as immigration, to the right, and are becoming disillusioned with the party and are going to the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, and independent candidates as well. And there seems to be a complete ignoring of that whole phenomenon going on and a hyperfixation on reform, even though Labour is losing an equal amount, if not more, votes to Greens and Lib Dems than they are to reform.
I'll say this as well. Even on say immigration, for example, because obviously Starmer's infamous "Island of Strangers" speech, which especially those on sort of like the left or the progressive wing of Labour support found very distasteful. The problem that they've got there, though, is that Starmer can get on stage and try and use rhetoric like that in order to do what he thinks is going to try and capture and reform voters. But the problem is that unless he's actually reducing immigration by a significant amount, unless he's actually able to show progress on stopping all the small boat crossings, then that rhetoric is meaningless, and the voters who are voting reform or whoever else aren't going to buy it. But at the same time, he's still managed to piss off the people who were a bit squeamish because it sounded like a bit like Enoch Powell. So there wasn't really any benefit to him having made that speech one way or the other. If he's going to reduce both legal and illegal immigration, that needs to be a proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Rant and rave about it once you've done it, but no one's going to give you the time of day until then. But in the meantime, he's managed to piss off some of his own voters once more.
The other issue is
Yeah.
as well is that this has been a constant theme throughout his entire premiership up until this point, where everything he does basically angers both sides. When he does the Island of Strangers speech is the most perfect example of this, but there are other examples as well, where basically he will say something that is designed to appeal to reform voters. It falls on deaf ears because he'll say that speech, and then a few weeks later, you'll get a news story which will be like record number of boat crossings happened this month. And people will look at that and they'll go, right, you got all the rhetoric they agree with, but you've got none of the policy substance to match it, so you just look like a fraud to me. So I'm not going to vote for you. I'm going to go with Reform, who I believe will match action with rhetoric. But then you've also got the urban progressive types who basically look at that and go, that's racist, that's xenophobic, that's the ghost of Enoch Powell coming back to haunt us. I'm not voting for you. I'm voting for the Greens. I'm voting for the Lib Dems, who will care about protecting all people from harm no matter what. So you lose votes from both groups, and it's just a constant theme over and over again with everything Starmer does. Crime is another one, although they haven't focused on this as much as immigration, where you'll have Starmer be like, "Oh, we need to be tough on the criminals" and all that sort of stuff, and then you'll read news stories about people committing absolutely obscene crimes, getting barely any punishment for it. So the reform voters will be like, again, you're not matching your rhetoric with action, so I don't care what you have to say, I'm going with reform. And then the urban progressive types will be like, this is far too harsh, this is demonizing people because of poor socioeconomic circumstances, so again, I'm going to the Greens and Lib Dems. It's this theme repeated again and again and again, and it's why Labour keeps bleeding votes all over the place.
Can I pivot slightly to what I hope is a slightly more positive note? What this potential rebellion, I mean, it was a rebellion. It may not have ended up being put to the vote in the way that would defeat the bill because they've had to U-turn and concede on some stuff. But, we've now had Labour being forced to change their winter fuel payments policy, to change what their benefit changes were going to be as well. It seems that the Parliamentary Labour Party, the backbenchers, are beginning to wake up to the idea that they can say no to some of these things when they really feel the pressure from their constituents, or when they think that it's the wrong direction, leadership's being tin-eared. They are starting now to actually, not just fall in line every single time, which I think is a positive. Given that Labour has a majority the size that it does, I think it's quite a good thing that their MPs are willing to rebel on some issues from time to time, because it sort of keeps them a little bit sharper than they would be otherwise.
Yeah, the other thing with that as well is that it does lead to a sort of emboldening in the future because whether Starmer realises it or not, because of the concessions that have been made on welfare and winter fuel, backbenchers in the future, if they ever feel vexed about something or they feel vexed about the leadership, can rebel similar number to this, and they know that the leadership will eventually concede to them, even if they take a tough stance against them to begin with. Um,
Although I will make one point to say that obviously the backbenchers, it's been quite a unique thing with this particular issue, that, as we said before, it wasn't just the usual suspects, the left, the soft left, the Blairites, they all seems to be rebelling against it. When further issues crop up in the future, it's not necessarily automatic to say that the Parliamentary Labour Party will think as one homogenous blob in trying to rebel against stuff. It will still have to be rather specific, very unpopular policies that are going to get enough people together in bulk for a successful rebellion. If it's still going to be just a few dozen here or there, then you'll to a degree you'll probably still get some of them, keeping their powder dry and going, this isn't the one for us to succeed with.
That's the case, but I think that the issue with that is that it focuses on the idea that it's only welfare that caused this to happen. And I think that from what I have read from people like Pippa Correa and Robert Peston, this rebellion, welfare was only half the reason it happened. There's another reason to this as well, why it happened. And I think a lot of it is because the Parliamentary Labour Party and the Starmer Premiership government are basically having increased tension between one another because a lot of parliamentary rebels who were voting for this were voting for it because they were unhappy about the way the leadership had been treating them over the past year. Very few meetings between the leadership and the MPs. Feeling that their votes, their voices and concerns were being ignored by an executive that wanted to rush through whatever they felt like doing. one of the people who was anonymous, who didn't want to give their name, said to a journalist that Keir was never here and always abroad on some kind of foreign escapade, like a NATO summit or a meeting with Donald Trump, than he was actually governing. And we felt that we were just being ignored and fobbed off by the leadership to just essentially act as a rubber stamp. That was essentially what people felt like. They felt that instead of being treated as a parliamentary party with values and ideas and policies, that the PLP was essentially just a glorified rubber stamp for Starmer, and they were not happy with that.
Oh, okay then. Well, that does add a bit of greater context to things, because if what you're saying is that actually this is symptomatic of a much greater sense of unrest in the parliamentary Labour Party, rather than it just being I mean, arguably you could say this is a very big and unpopular issue, that it made sense this was a thing that they'd coalesce around. But you're saying that there is a great degree of discontent in the ranks now anyway, which may well make them more rebellious in future.
Yeah, that's what was being reported by a number of journalists anyway, that a lot of this was motivated by discontent with the treatment of the Parliamentary Labour Party by the leadership, that it wasn't just welfare that caused them to behave this way, but rather welfare was the final straw that broke the camel's back and made people rebel
Oh,
en masse.
Tom.
Made people rebel en masse, and that it was only and it was just their way of expressing their discontent, basically. And so that's why I think that unless there is a fundamental way difference in the way Starmer treats his MPs, I don't think this will be the end of rebellions from Labour in the future. And if there is any unpopular things moving forward in the future, that they may be much more willing to rebel over that as another way of voicing discontent.
Okay. I want to take a few comments we've got in the chat here, and I've got one which is going to segue us very nicely into the next little topic I wanted to discuss. So Lee Ball says, "Never here." If only that rhymed with something. Shockwave said, "Starmer's already at the stage where it feels like he's within a year of a general election. So with there being 4 years left, God knows where we'll be by then." And John Cooper said, "Labour seem to forget about the Greens, Lib Dems and Independents can now do well." This brings me on to the other thing I wanted to talk about. I had a comment from Lee Hallam the past day telling me that it seemed a bit more imminent now that Jeremy Corbyn was going to be setting up some kind of a left-wing party or bloc with some of the independent MPs in Parliament. I'd been hearing, murmurings about this for the last few months, but I hadn't yet seen it bear any fruit or not. Have you heard any more about this in the last few days, the prospect of a new left-wing Jeremy Corbyn-led party?
The idea has been floated now ever since
Oh, I'll need you
Corbyn.
closer to the mic, sorry.
The idea has been floated ever since Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party permanently just before the last general election. But only in the last few days has the murmurings of it gotten much louder, where it does seem that Corbyn is moving and inching more towards setting up his own parliamentary party, like something called like the Peace and Justice Party or something like that. And including the independents, who are colloquially known as the Gaza independents, within the party, and basically forming like a left wing bloc that functions as an own independent political party that ends up contesting elections in the future, both local and national elections. So,
Is
yeah, I
there
have heard about that.
Do you think there's the possibility of any defections from Labour to this group? Because I think at the moment there are also some Labour MPs that currently have the whip suspended from having rebelled on previous votes. I'm thinking sort of like socialist campaign group types.
Yeah, there have been Zara Sultana is one who has been particularly focused on. She was kicked out of the party because she voted against keeping the two-child benefit cap. She was kicked out, and she has not been let back in since. So there is a high likelihood that she could go there as well. Richard Burgon is another one, but I think he may wait in the future for another leadership contest, and if that goes nowhere, then he might jump ship then. So I don't think it'll be him. John McDonnell is another one who's had his name floated, but I think that's quite unlikely given that he seems to believe that there is still something that could be salvaged out of Labour right now. So probably not him. Rebecca Long Bailey is another one as well. She might join because she was suspended for voting against two-child benefit cap, though I think she's got the whip back now. But she may decide to go as join that party as well. So there is a possibility of defections from certain members of the Socialist Campaign Group, and it's also worth noting as well that Corbyn's party, if it was created, a hypothetical poll was created and it was revealed that about 10% of people, it would get 10% in the polls if it ended up forming, although most of it would come at the expense of the Greens rather than the expense of Labour.
I was about to say, where did we think support would head to this Corbyn project from? And I was going to say probably Labour, the Greens, and I'd imagine potentially a few non-voters as well. I remember a while back when I've been talking about the prospects of reform. I don't know whether this was on stream or in the bullet chat, but I'd said before about the prospect of a big pool of non-voters existing out there who could end up moving into support reform. And it was kind of poo-pooed a little bit because I think someone had said, yes, but everyone always talks about non-voters and they never show up. That's why they're non-voters. But actually, I think reform has got a tidy little slice of previously non-voting people supporting them. I think Corbyn has that same kind of effects, doesn't he? I think there was, back when he first became leader of the Labour Party, there was quite a few people who had either not been that politically engaged before or who were politically interested but didn't feel that they had a party who represented them. They all headed into Labour. So that, I would assume, is kind of the pool that we're fishing in, sort of Labour, the Greens, people who aren't currently voting. I don't know, maybe a few dozen of Galloway's Workers' Party types, the less anti-woke ones.
I
They
would
might go in.
Yeah, I would probably say a small number of George Galloway's Bathurst party would probably end up getting being picked off by Corbyn. But yeah, I mean, Corbyn and Farage are both similar in the sense that they are both very good at attracting people to politics who would not otherwise vote in elections. Like, um, when you look at the turnout in the last election in 2024 and compare it to 2017 and 2019, the turnout drop was massive. And a lot of that was from Tories, but I think a good number of it was also from Labour as well. People who voted Labour during Corbyn's time, but ultimately decided not to vote for them and either voted for the Greens or Independents or just mostly didn't vote at all. So I do think that the makeup of people that you described would end up voting for Corbyn's party if it was to form. A lot of it would come at the expense of the Greens. There would be people who would vote for it who are currently voting for Galloway's Bathurst party, and there would be non-voters, maybe a lot of them as well, that would vote for them for it as well. Maybe a very, very, very tiny amount of Liberal Democrats as well, but not a huge amount, I feel.
That's fair. And given we're on the topics of small or splinter parties being set up, I think it's only right we mention. Now I've not actually seen anything of this firsthand. I literally heard it being mentioned in the bullet chat before we went on air. Is Rupert Lowe starting his own party now?
He has Yes and no. He has basically created a political organization called Restore Britain, which he claims is not a political party, but rather a political movement. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up forming its own political party as well.
Can I can I
Apparently,
hop, can I hop on my soapbox real quickly and just point out it's interesting to me that so many of these newly established right-wing parties tend to start with the prefix "re" in front of their name. You've obviously got Reform doing very well for themselves right now. You had Reclaim, Loza Fox's meme party for a little while, and now if this becomes a party, Restore. It's all about getting something back that you used to have, isn't it? That's that's basically the gist of it.
The reason for that is because all of these parties are reactionary in their outlook and nature, and reactionary politics is always focused on reclaiming something or in whole the past. So that's why you've always got them starting with that reform, reclaim, restore. It's because these parties are inherently reactionary, and reactionaries are all about harking back to a past, whether it existed or didn't exist, and bringing it back into the present.
I'm
So
gonna
that's why they always are like that.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate against my own argument there. I think restore and reclaim absolutely uh, tie into that really well. Reform, on the other hand, perhaps that one's a little bit too vague. I could quite easily imagine like a progressive left wing party coming along called Reform. You know, the idea that you want to reform the current system. So maybe that one isn't necessarily tied to the idea of reactionary, even if the politics of the party itself might be a bit.
I
Um,
think that the difference is, though, is that with Reform, the actual name of the Reform Party in the UK has its origins in a political party in Canada that went by the same name as well. Because the whole reason Reform is called Reform is because a party in Canada split off from the Progressive Conservatives that called itself Reform. And much like Reform in the UK, it was a right wing populist party that left the Progressive Conservatives because they thought that they were too far to the left, basically. So that's where it gets its origin. So yeah, I mean, if you look at the word in isolation, you could say, well, reform is not an inherently reactionary policy or idea, but when you look at the way political parties called reform have existed, most of them do have right wing reactionary politics at their core.
Fair play. We've had a comment here from Josh T, who says, "Hi Swiss, just wondering, do you have a Discord channel for this YouTube channel that people can join?" I don't have a Discord channel. I hardly ever use Discord. I know that you guys and Bullet have a Discord like server that you use sort of additionally to Bullet. Um, but I don't personally have a Discord for the viewers of this YouTube channel. I'm afraid. The closest thing I've got is like a little group chat on Twitter, which people are free to join. There aren't really any barriers to entry, you know, as long as you're relatively nice. Um, but yeah, so if you are on Twitter and you're interested in that, anything else like that at the moment. I'll do a couple more comments quickly as well. Cameron Hickman says Galloway is based. Nice for you to pop up, Cameron. Jalo
By the way,
Punk says,
by the
"Oh,
way, it's also
Be-
okay. I'll let you read the comments.
oh yeah. Just one more. Jalo Punker said Ben Habib has announced a new party, Advance, chasing membership before registering as a political party. Oh, Advance. That's got some gusto to it. That's a bit like reminds me of what's Macron's French one? On March.
On the march,
On the
yeah.
march, you know, it's like forward momentum, advance. Although it's not going to work because he's not putting R&D in front of it. He needs it restart. There we are.
Restart. That's another one.
Yeah.
There are a number of these parties that have popped up recently, like basically people that Farage has pissed off in one form or another, are joining these parties and setting these parties up because they basically think that reform are too wet and not right wing enough. So yeah,
Oh, I need you closer.
Ben Habib is another one who has set up his own party. It's called Advanced. I've heard rumors as well that there's another one of these parties that's being created, but who knows if it will. Ultimately, I think it's just more of a sort of gimmicky thing. I don't think these will have that much of an impact. I think that it will be just another version of the Heritage Party or reclaim, basically similar to like Rosa Fox's party. I don't think these parties will gain much impact because the vast majority of people have no idea who Ben Habib or Rupert Lowe actually are, and much of their politics, I think, is far too unpalatable to the British electorate to actually get anywhere substantial. I mean, I'm convinced that Rupert Lowe will lose his seat next time and probably won't even keep his deposit in the next election. So I doubt his party will make any inroads anywhere. To me, it's just a sort of example of one, how much the Anglo American right wing is radicalizing, and two, how much Nigel Farage runs his parties as de facto personalist dictatorships, and how anybody who doesn't kowtow to him is booted out immediately, and that they have such a gripe and grudge against him that they set up these parties in order to try and derail his success. But as the saying goes, you can't barrage the Farage.
And I suppose as well, like the success of Farage's Reform Party in a way is the exception that proves the rule. It's very, very hard for new political parties to pop up and gain traction and really shift the political landscape. Like, the Greens have been around in one form or another since the 70s. They broke through with their first ever MP 15 years ago. Now they sit at high single digit numbers approaching 10% in the polls. They're just starting to really get a ground level game going at sort of the local council level. You had the SDP in the 1980s splitting off from Labour. They sort of did some stuff in the wilderness for a little bit for a few elections until them and the Liberal Party decided let's just join together and make the Lib Dems, and then the Lib Dems have remained a third party or a fourth party depending which year you're looking at, but never really advanced much beyond that. It really is like, I mean, even the Farage thing, reform didn't suddenly pop up overnight. The precursor to that was the Brexit Party, and the Brexit Party was a spiritual successor to UKIP in a way. So Farage
And
has,
UKIP was a successor to the referendum party in the 90s as well.
yeah, indeed. So it is very, very hard for something to pop up truly fresh and really shift things within the political system of this country. And considering that, Farage's reform, they got like 4 or 5 MPs at the last general election, and now they're leading in all the polls by a healthy little margin. That is so opposite to what we're used to seeing when it comes to minor parties coming along and making an impact, that it as much as it's the exception, it does reinforce very much the fact that it has obviously not happened with your Galloway's Workers' Party or the Reclaim Party or the Heritage Party or Change UK or the insert name of another 50 parties here, that kind of thing. Anyway, Tom, we are coming up to about an hour or so here, and I didn't want to be lingering for much longer than that because it's very hot today. I don't want to stay tethered in front of this laptop. In fact, the fan is blowing the heat from my laptop towards me, so I don't know how much it's actually helping. But at the very least, yeah, but at the very least, I did want to address just the latest that have been happening with this Labour rebellion over welfare changes and the popularity of dear old Keir Starmer as well. Are there any final points you wish to make before we finish for today?
Not too much, other than just basically, I think that in the future, what happened with this rebellion will be remembered in a lot of ways as sort of the beginning of the end of Starmer's premiership. Because I've said this on the stream a couple of times, and I've said it in the bullet chat many times, that Starmer, I think, will, whether he makes it to the end of his premiership or not, as prime minister, or whether he resigns, will depend on how next year's local elections go. Because next year's local elections are, for all intents and purposes, a mini general election, because we've got the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Parliament, and numerous councils in English urban areas up for election.
Mm-hmm.
And Labour is projected in current polling to do abysmally in all of them. They're projected to come third in Wales, third in Scotland, and also lose hundreds of councillors across England. because you've got places like Birmingham where they will definitely be wiped out because of what's happened with the council going bankrupt and the issue with waste disposal that caused a lot of problems there. You've got London, which is also up for election as well. Those councils are up for election, and Labour could do particularly badly there because of their response to ongoings in the Middle East, as well as general discontent with the Labour Party as a whole. So it's shaping up to be another for Starmer. And if the next year from now is a repeat of what we've had the past year, and then he gets obliterated in next year's locals, then I think he'll be forced to resign as Prime Minister, and we'll have another Prime Minister starting at the end of 2026. I think that if that happens, this welfare rebellion will sort of be remembered as the beginning of that process, eventually culminating in Starmer's resignation.
Well, I had 2026 penciled in already as the year that I thought Kemi Badenoch would be going, and I already felt pretty certain of that. I'll mull it over this prospect of Starmer being in serious trouble following the next locals. I think I'm still wedded to the idea at the moment that that he's relatively safe in his position. But of course, you know, events, my dear boy, events. Things can change. But certainly, I think Badenoch will be gone next year. It will be interesting to see just how unpopular, how low can Keir go before it's time for him to walk as well. Right then, and with that, I'm going to say goodbye to the dear viewers. So thank you very much to all of you guys for joining us for this little stream this afternoon. I hope wherever you are, you're keeping relatively cool. And thank you very much as well to Tom, who's joined me for this one. This is where you get to gracefully bow out, Tom. You get to jump back in, and you know the viewers get to applaud you as you leave.
Yeah. I mean, oh yeah, I do definitely agree that next year will also be when Kemi Badenoch goes, because I fully expect the Tories to be continuing what's been going on since the last election, just doing incredibly poorly across the board, no matter where they are, because they are in such a bad spot that they're trying to compete with third place with the Liberal Democrats because of how badly they're doing. Like, they, much like Labour, are losing votes.
Oh, louder, please.
They're losing votes to Reform from their right, and they're losing votes from their centre to the Liberal Democrats. So yeah, I expect the Tories will continue the exact same trends that's been going on since the last election of just going nowhere, losing votes across the board, and just getting smashed in every election they go in.
And on that optimistic note for the Conservative and Unionist Party of the United Kingdom, it is time for us to say goodbye. Dear viewers, thank you very much for joining us. If you've enjoyed this stream, do drop us a like, and I'll see you all again soon. Ta-ta.
Goodbye.